Thank you. Mr. Weinstein, turns out you had a couple more questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for the court's indulgence. Agent Berni, I'm sorry. I think my eagerness for recess overcame my need to ask you two more questions.
No problem, sir.
My first question is, we're talking about drive tests. You were not asked to do a drive test in 2016, correct?
I was not. I was not involved in the case until, again, at the earliest 2022, I think.
And you haven't seen any drive tests that may have been performed back at that time, correct?
I do not, no.
Okay. Also, you were not asked to consider any cell phone records of my client, Diamante Kendrick, correct?
Not during this time period, no.
Let me clarify, make sure we're clear. In that January 10, January 11 timeframe of 2015, you were not asked to consider any of the cell phone records.
I did not. No.
Thank you. No more questions.
All right. And
Now, the reason that's problematic, and it goes in line with what we were just talking about, Diamante Kendrick is charged with the murder of Donovan Thomas, so why didn't you look at his phone records here? And that is a great thing to point out, because, cool, if the jury is deliberating later and someone's like, well, they didn't have Diamante Kendrick's phone records, and someone's like, well, yeah, they did, and the jury can't quickly discuss with each other, well, technically they did, but for other instances, not for this one. Now, Doug just dropped that out loud for us to pick up, and I'm putting it down. I caught it.
Mr. Steele.
Agent, I asked you some questions. Were you given enough time to review your notes?
I was.
Or the records, I guess. Okay, and tell us what you did, if you don't mind. Tell the jurors.
Yep, so what I did was review the cell phone records, the toll analysis, who called who at what date and what time, that I had already prepared from 7:29 on the 10th to 6:30 a.m. on the 11th.
And to be fair, and you weren't asked to do it, but to be fair, the records, let's say, from Mr. Jeffrey Williams really go from January 4th, 2015 to January 15th, 2015. Is that fair to say?
It is.
All right, but for purposes of timing, just today, and you're going to come back, can you answer the question, and we'll just go in person order, if that's okay, and you could designate the order if it's easier. Did Mr. Williams contact Mr. Copeland? When I say Mr. Williams, let me change it. Did Mr. Williams, according to the records, did the phone associated with Mr. Williams initiate the contact with Mr. Copeland's phone that's associated with him?
Initiate contact. So you're only asking about, did the device associated with Mr. Williams, 3904, initiate or place an outgoing call to any of these names you're
Yeah, or a text message.
Okay. Well, we would only have calls in this case, I believe, and there were no outgoing calls from the 3904 to Mr. Copeland's 5991.
And just, if you have it done already, it would be great. Does Mr. Copeland's cell phone records associated with him, does that ever call Mr. Jeffrey Williams during this time period that you have?
Yeah, so again, the time period of 7:29 on the 10th to 6:30 a.m. on the 11th, there's no contact between those two devices at all.
What's the next one if we want to go in your order? Otherwise, I'll give you the name.
I have the device associated with Mr. Treadwell.
And that's Kelvin Treadwell, fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And did you know him to be working for Mr. Williams at that time?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
Well, he can say, I have no idea. Overruled.
Again, I just was provided the phone numbers and who was associated with those numbers. So I have no idea whether they worked for each other or what.
Okay. Mr. Treadwell and Mr. Williams, you could give them, but clearly we saw in your charts that there is communication between those two devices according to the record. Fair to say?
There's 10.
Go ahead. Okay.
So there's 10 calls between those two, and there's calls that go both ways, initiated by the 3904 device associated with Mr. Williams, and calls that are initiated by Mr. Treadwell to the 3904.
Okay.
So during that time period, 10 calls.
Next name, if you don't mind.
I have a device associated with McMullen.
Okay, Mr. Demise McMullen. And just go, same way in order both ways. First, Mr. Williams initiating communication according to the records, Mr. Williams, number associated with Mr. Williams, and then initiating it to the number associated with Mr. McMullen.
So there's only two contacts, again, during this time period, 7:29 on the 10th to 6:30 a.m. on the 11th. Only two contacts. Both of those contacts were the device associated with Mr. McMullen calling the device associated with Mr. Williams, the 3904.
So Mr. Williams, according to the records, the phone associated with Mr. Williams never initiated contact with the phone associated with Mr. McMullen, according to records.
That's correct.
All right, next name, if you don't mind.
Is the device associated to Dora Greer?
Okay, do you know that? And if you don't know it, just say, I don't know it. Do you know that to be Jeffrey Williams' sister?
I do not know that.
Okay, that's fine. there are communications that you showed us already, fair to say?
There are 4 communications.
All right. If you need to give more detail, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I was going to go to the next phone, but
Yeah, there's 4 communications, and it looks like all those communications were initiated by the 3904 calling the 9596 associated with
okay. Next name, if you don't mind.
is Dolly Greer, the device associated to Dolly Greer.
Do you know that individual to be the sister of Mr. Jeffrey Williams? If you don't, just say I don't know.
I do not know that.
Okay. Go ahead with those contact, fair to say?
Yep, and it's one contact, and that is the device associated with Dolly Greer, the 1990 device, calling the device associated with Mr. Williams, the 3904.
Okay. Next one.
Those are the only individuals that contact or are contacted by the 3904 number during the time period of 7/29 on the 10th to 6:30 a.m. on the 11th.
And that includes your search for that limited time period, Mr. Cobb.
It does.
And when I say Mr. Cobb, the device associated with Mr. Cobb or the records associated with Mr. Cobb, correct?
It does.
Mr. Zachary
Correct.
and Mr. Treadwell.
Correct. All the known devices, those are the only ones.
Okay. I want to thank you for doing that. Thank you, Your Honor.
Sure. Mr. Atkins?
Thank you, Your Honor.
So guys, that was to really cast doubt on the theory that Jeffrey Williams ordered this hit on Donovan Thomas, because he's not out here. Potentially the contact between Treadwell could be explained by an employee relationship, but he never tries to contact Nard, Demise McMullen. There's no communication between the devices for Duop, Justin Cobb, and Jeffrey Williams, and same for Quindarius Zachary.
Now, Agent Berni, do you recall being asked a number of questions about if the district attorney's office ever asked you to plot X or check Y on cross-examination?
Yes.
If any defense counsel had asked you before testifying here today to look into or plot any of those matters they addressed, would you have looked into it before testifying today?
I would have, yes.
Now,
Wow.
Agent Berni, with
So this seems a little bit like burden shifting, but it doesn't sound like there's an objection. So to try to rehabilitate any damage that could have been done by Weinstein and Steele saying, oh, you were never asked to look at Yak's phone for January 10th? Adkins gets up there and says, well, did the defense ask you to look at their records? As if that's supposed to imply something nefarious and clean up, that the state didn't do their job to investigate. Sounds a little bit like burden shifting, but there was no objection. And honestly, it's such a reach of an argument. It's probably the best Adkins can really work with. But wow.
the phone toll analysis that you did, if records did not, or let me ask you this, what was the time frame again, or the time window of that toll analysis that you conducted?
Yeah, so it's on the 10th from 7:29 p.m. until the 11th at 6:30 a.m.
And in the investigations you work, do you typically analyze 12 to 10 phone numbers like you did in this case?
No, this is one of the larger number of phones for a specific case.
So with toll analysis with these numbers for times or dates other than the January 10th, 2015 murder of Donovan Thomas, would you be familiar or have looked through the entirety of records on dates you were not requested to?
No.
And Agent Berni, do you recall on cross-examination you were asked a number of questions about factors that go into cell towers and location?
By the phone, yes.
And things such as terrain and wave frequency, things of that nature. Do you recall that on cross?
I do.
Now, how long has the Federal Bureau of Investigation used call detail records in investigations?
CAS started up in 2009 because, we started using them. So 16, 15 years.
And since that was started from the FBI in 2009, would any of those factors related to physics or weather or terrain, would those have applied in 2009 just as they do in 2024 or not?
They would.
And have you either directly or as part of an investigation physically located someone based off call detail records in a non-criminal case?
Overruled.
In a non-criminal case?
Such as a natural disaster or something like that.
I have.
And did you, in those cases, rely on call detail records like the nature you used for the murder of Donovan Thomas on January 10, 2015?
I have, yes. And the most recent being the Bureau just used.
Your Honor, the state feels given some of the cross-examination, it is relevant. Questioning the science behind it.
Sustained.
Agent Berni, are historical cell site tower analysis reliable?
They are?
Overruled.
Agent Berni, can you explain to the jury how you're able to state that historical cell site analysis to include tower information is a reliable method to use?
Yeah,
Objection vague.
Overruled.
You may answer, Agent Berni.
yeah, again, these records, you got to remember, they're business records associated with the company. So they use them every day to optimize their network, right? Where they're dropped calls, where are lots of people placing calls, do I need to use more towers? But as far as law enforcement's use, I mean, we use them every single day to locate kidnapped kids, missing kids, runaways, both in the criminal context and the non-criminal context. The last time that we used it in the last time I used them in a non-criminal context was the hurricane relief through North.
Bolstering.
What was the other one?
Bolstering.
There you go.
Overruled.
Sustained for
and
bolstering.
Sustained.
Yes, there you
Agent
go.
Berni, on cross-examination, do you recall being asked about the cell tower location of the device associated with Kenneth Copeland?
I was.
I'm going to publish States Exhibit 332 Yankee, page 10. If you have that before you, Agent Berni, it's going to come up on the screen. Now, Agent Berni, do you recall being asked on cross-examination about a gap in time in Mr. Copeland's records?
I do.
And do you recall being asked if the phone was on or off?
I do.
Do you recall being asked? And for the record, I meant 532 Yankee, Your Honor. I may have accidentally said 332, but I meant 532 Yankee. Do you also recall being asked about when the phone is off, if it was in airplane mode?
I do recall that question.
And what is the gap of time, as depicted in page 10, between the 7:01 p.m. call and the 7:24:09 call?
Approximately 23 minutes, 22 minutes and some change.
Now, Agent Berni, I am going to go to slide 27. Do you see a gap in time in the phone associated with Defendant Williams between 7:03 and 7:29 p.m.?
I do.
Is that gap shorter, the same, or longer than the gap in time in the phone associated with Copeland's records we just discussed?
Maybe a minute or two longer, 24 minutes maybe?
And would the same questions posed to you apply in terms of, are you able to say if the phone was on or off for the phone associated with Defendant Williams in this time with the call detail records?
Again, you cannot. It's just based on activity on the network. And so we can only see when there's towers and sectors used, where the device is.
And Agent Berni, do you recall a conversation about the duration or length of the call at 7:29 p.m.?
I do.
With the toll analysis that you created in the Excel spreadsheet, did you make that document?
I did.
And for the calls on that toll analysis, did you, for each of the calls on there, calculate the duration depicted the same for the calls you looked at? As in, would how you calculated the duration on that call be any different than how you would calculate the duration on any of the other calls on those boards or the Excel spreadsheet you created?
No, they're the same. Again, I review the records based on the caller and put that in as the duration.
And Agent Berni, do you recall on cross-examination the question was asked about if the phone had fallen and hung up accidentally or something of that nature?
I do.
After this call, when is the device associated with Defendant Williams show movement? As in, how many minutes after this call is there a separate tower from this device after this incoming call from the phone associated with Demise McMullen?
So the next activity where we can definitely see that there was movement was at 7:33, so approximately 4 minutes later.
And Agent Berni, you were asked on cross-examination about toll analysis or who was contacting who. Do you recall?
I do.
Now, Agent Berni, I am going to publish what has been already admitted as State's Exhibit. Your State's Exhibit. One brief moment, Your Honor. The toll analysis you conducted in this case. As State's Exhibit 533, Yankee. It will come up on the screen, Agent Berni. Now, when was, in this toll analysis you conducted, when is the first call that the phone number associated with Mr. Copeland interacted with any of these 12 numbers you looked at?
I'd have to scroll down. I don't recall. It's not right away for sure.
Is the device associated with Mr. Copeland end in 5991?
Does. Yes, it does. There it is right there. So the first time it shows in the toll analysis, again, of known numbers, calling known numbers, is at 8:22 p.m. So it shows in here as 2022, which again is 8:22 p.m.
How long after the 911 call is this 8:22 p.m. call?
Approximately an hour.
And Agent Berni, I'm going to Control F 5991. Do you see this on the screen?
I do.
And I want you to let me know each time the phone associated with Kenneth Copeland speaks with someone new, either outgoing or incoming. Are you following?
I am.
The first time this appears, what device associated with a person's name that you analyzed does defendant Copeland's phone interact with?
8935 is the device associated with Mr. Sledge.
I'm going to keep going, and when you see another number, just let me know.
Okay, the 5726 is the one associated with Mr. Zachary. Then the 8935 again. Then the 5726 again. 5726, 5726, 5726, again 5726. Again, the 8935, 8935, again 8935, again the 8935, 5726, again Zachary, 5726, 5726, Zachary, Zachary again, Zachary again, Zachary, and then Zachary again.
So does the device associated with Kenneth Copeland speak with anyone else in this toll analysis other than the phone associated with Mr. Zachary or Mr. Sledge?
No, those are the only two devices.
Okay, personally, I don't think I would have tried to highlight that. Personally. That Kenneth Copeland is calling up Munktunk, Antonio Sledge, Quindarius Zachary. When we've heard Quindarius Zachary talk about how we had to get our story straight. We heard Kenneth Copeland talk about who told him the story of what happened. I wouldn't highlight that.
And
personally,
do you recall being asked on cross-examination if Mr. Copeland had, or if you had ever been requested to analyze another phone?
I do.
Now, Agent Berni, do you recall on direct examination being asked about a phone number that ended in 7604? I'm going to show you something, Agent Berni. I'm going to publish State's Exhibit 532, Yankee. And Agent Berni, do you recall me asking you about contact with Mr. Copeland's phone in relation to 4090 and 7604?
I do.
Now, does the phone associated with Kenneth Copeland at 5991 communicate with this 7604 or have calls either incoming or outgoing?
Several. You can see them listed both on this side and this side, both incoming and outgoing.
And without counting them up, I'm going to publish slide 11 as well and ask you if that number appears or my apologies, let me go back. And then I'm going to publish slide 12. Do you see that 7604 on this slide?
I do. You can see it right here, 7604, incoming call.
And is there more than one?
There's two of them,
Now,
or three of them, my apologies.
Agent Berni, I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as 518 Yankee Alpha. It's going to come up on the screen here in just a minute. Let me know when you can see this, Agent Berni.
I have it up.
And what is the last four? Is this the same phone number you see that is associated with, or that I've been asked you about on the records in Mr. Copeland's phone?
It is.
And what is the account name associated with that phone?
Trez Brock.
If you were to try to determine if someone had a physical device on them, would you look at frequently called numbers in the time frame that you were analyzing?
That is a way you could do it, yes.
And would, if you knew associated relatives or friends that a phone you were trying to place a device to a specific person were calling, would that be relevant for you if you were ever asked to do that?
It would be.
Now, Agent Berni, on cross-examination, or let me ask you this too, the slides we just depicted, does the phone associated with Mr. Copeland, does it have a small, average, or high amount of phone calls in those slides that you analyzed?
That's a little vague.
That's subjective, is that what you said?
I'll ask another question.
Sustained.
Agent Berni, with the three slides you plotted, pages 10, 11, and 12, related to Copeland, you have those before you?
I do.
Does the phone associated with Mr. Copeland, does it between those three slides have either incoming or outgoing calls from similar numbers, as in the same numbers?
It does.
And is there one call, is there two calls, is there 10 calls? On average, between those three slides, how much calls, either incoming or outgoing, ballpark, is there from the device associated with Mr. Copeland?
There's several. Maybe around 10. The second slide has maybe 8. The third slide probably has 10, and the fourth slide has probably close to 20.
Does it appear from that, what you just articulated, that that phone is being utilized in that window of time plotted on those three calls?
Yeah, there's a series of both incoming and outgoing activities.
Now, do you recall also on cross-examination being asked about if Mr. Copeland's phone was hit near the crime scene?
Correct.
And do you recall discussing a call at 7:28 p.m. in his records?
I do.
Was that 7:28 p.m. before or after the 7:22 911 call of the murder of Donovan Thomas?
It's after.
And Agent Berni, do you also, or let me ask you this, as a FBI cast agent, when you review cases, are you, you've been asked a lot of questions about hypotheticals. Do you recall that on cross?
I have.
Are you, is it difficult for you to speak in absolute terms when reviewing call detail records?
Yes.
So if someone asks you a question, if a hypothesis is feasible or possible,
Is he gonna say that some call between like Kenneth Copeland and whoever the other party was at 7:28 p.m. was after a 911 call to say that maybe Kenneth Copeland already heard the news because of a 911 dispatch and word got out that quickly? Because I know they wouldn't use that same logic to conceptualize the same possibility for any of the co-defendants sitting in the room. So what was that question for?
how do you answer that question with your training experience?
Yeah, obviously, I take what they asked and obviously look at all the pieces we have, pieces of evidence or information that we have in order to formulate my opinion to answer the question. So, based on time, locations, distances, all of those things, I take all of those things into account when formulating my opinion in response.
Now, Agent Berni, I am publishing 532 Yankee, page 10. Do you see the slide, Agent Berni?
I do.
And do you recall being asked if it is feasible for the device associated with Copeland to be at the crime scene at 7:22 p.m.?
I do.
what, in your training and experience of reviewing historical cell site analysis, where is the device associated with Kenneth Copeland with the towers and plots on this screen likely to be? Projection, speculation.
Overruled.
And please use the wood pointer if you need to, Agent Berni.
Yeah, so again, based on all of the information we have, which again is, call it 701 in this general area. The device has been in this general area prior to that. This general area, again, is this area around the QR location here. And then the tower and sector used at 724 here, again, if asked, I would again assume that the device was probably in this general area here around the time of 722.
And is that time you just pointed out separate and apart from the crime scene at 330 McDaniel Street?
Can you say that again?
Is the location you just pointed out, 178 Maury Avenue Southeast, is that not the crime scene at 330 McDaniel Street?
Correct, that's a separate location up here we see on the map.
And Agent Berni, do you also recall being asked about, on cross-examination, towers and if they can be miles apart or ranges of towers?
I do.
And in a city like Atlanta, are towers miles apart like you mentioned they may be in Nebraska, or something different?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending upon the provider and how they want to utilize towers, sometimes they're really close, several towers within a mile downtown, and then sometimes they might be, a mile to 3 miles apart in different parts.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Agent Berni, I am going to publish the toll analysis spreadsheet we were just discussing. That is State's Exhibit 533, Yankee. Do you recall there's discussion about the 2920 number and the last name Williams?
I do.
Do you see that 2920 number
Are we getting an
on the
answer
toll
on
analysis
that?
you were requested to conduct on this case?
I do.
And who is the name associated with that?
It's Brian Williams.
So that's Birdman.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Thank you, Agent Berni. No further redirect from the state.
Recross.
All right, and a little recross from Steele.
Agent, when there is somebody missing and you assist successfully in locating them from phone records, is that true?
Yes, sir.
How old are those phone records that you're using?
Yeah, most of the time, we get phone records as soon as we can. So, obviously, we're looking for individuals. If they go missing today, we're getting the records today or tomorrow.
Okay, not 8 years later. Is that fair to say?
Again, when we work Amber Alerts and missing kids, no, but we do work cold cases where we assist in locating pieces of evidence using old records, unfortunately.
Now, today's records, cell phone companies changed. I don't know if it's mandated, you tell the jurors, but now they give a distance from the cell tower where the device made a connection to the tower. Is that true?
So there's different records. So the CDRs are the same. The call detail records have, who called who, what date and time, and then the tower and sector used. Those are still all the same for the CDRs. There are now new additional records called timing advance records, and those are records from the phone checking in with the network. And those include the tower, the sector side of the tower, and a distance that device is away. The difference is call detail records kept for a long period of time, the shortest being Verizon at 365 days. Timing advance kept for a much shorter time because there's just so much data. Verizon, the shortest, keeps it for 7 days.
And when you say 7 days, does that mean today's the 14th day of October 2024? Verizon keeps today's records until next Monday, the 21st day of October 2024. Fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And then tomorrow, today's records would fall off, and then it would be kept from the 15th, Tuesday, the 15th of October, until Tuesday, the 22nd of October. Is that how it works?
Yes, sir. It's a rolling calendar, just like you explained.
Okay. Is that similar to, if you've done this work, surveillance cameras?
I have.
Is that similar?
It is, depending upon the settings on your surveillance cameras of, hey, this camera keeps 30 days or 60 days or 14 days. Yes.
And then as the 14th day comes up, then the first day's gone, and then it goes from originally day 2 to day 15, and then day 2 is gone, and day 3 to 16.
Correct.
All right. Now, let me ask you this. You wrote, and it's on 5/20/17, That's wrong, 532Y, it's in evidence, page 10, I believe, and page 11, if you don't mind showing that, sir. Yes, sir. Do you see on the left-hand side on page 10 of that exhibit, the fourth number down, it ends in 0102. Do you see that?
I do.
And then on page 11, same exhibit, in the center left, again, 0102. You see that?
I do.
And that is, again, Mr. Copeland's records, correct?
These are.
And Mr. Copeland's records show that the device associated, we're saying associated with Mr. Copeland, contacted that number 0102, correct?
Yeah, one's an outgoing call on page 10, and the other is an incoming call on page 11.
And the first one is approximately 6 minutes after the 911 call at 7:22. This is 7:28:45. Is that true?
It's at 7:28, so yeah, 6 minutes.
All right. And were you told through the district attorney's office who the 01, it says NA, which means not applicable, I assume. Is that what you write, NA?
That's correct. I don't know whose number that is.
Were you told a Naisha Williams? Does that sound familiar?
I don't know whose number that is.
All right. Were you ever given that number associated with the meeting in Garlington? Did the DA's office ever tell you?
I don't recall.
All right. Now,
Oops. So Kenneth Copeland's device associated with whatever has communications also with a number that the state never pointed out to Agent Berni is associated with a device belonging to Tamika Garlington. That's what you get, Adkins, for that redirect. Now you get this recross.
just using this as an example, and what's shown is the same exhibit number, page 11. May I approach, Your Honor? Do
You may.
you mind if I approach? I used to be one thing. Thank you, sir. Just tell me this. I'm not saying today's records. I'm not using today's record. But in 2015 January, if a call was, this would be the cell tower where the big circle is, correct?
The dot is, yes, sir.
Or the dot. And then you just were kind enough to give us an estimate of the sector, right?
Correct.
In that area. And that call, the handset, the cell phone as we all call it, that could be, according to these records, it could be right here, almost the person touching that cell tower potentially, correct?
Yes, sir, could.
It could also be out a mile or more from that cell tower. Fair to say?
It could. It depends on, again, the phone's going to pick the tower with the best signal. And as it gets closer to other towers, that signal may change. So if it's closer to another dot, which is a tower, it may use that one.
Okay. But generally, all you're doing, and I shouldn't say all, you're doing great, the assistance to everybody. But you're just telling me, you want to make it clear to jurors, if it's using this cell sector and this cell tower, ladies and gentlemen, it could be anywhere within the range that goes out. That's the best or strongest signal to that handset at that time.
Correct. And again, I'm testifying to a general area.
I just want to make that clear. Thank you. Your Honor, I have no other questions.
All right. Anybody else with Recross questions?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Special Agent Berni, thank you for your time. It sounds like we may see you again, but for now you are excused. Call your next witness.